I admit to being a little bit nervous when I signed up to do the Mont Blanc circuit. It's rated a 4 out of 5 for difficulty, and there are 2 particularly challenging days that I wanted to make sure that I was up for. But I have known ever since Linda first described it to me way back in the beginning of this show in 2017 that I too wanted to do Active Adventure's Mont Blanc tour. The European Alps are, of course, incredibly beautiful, but the mountains are challenging. I knew it was going to be tough. And since I'm closing in on 65 years old now, I figured if I was going to do this, I better work it into my schedule sooner rather than later in case my knees or my hips gave out. Boy, am I glad I did it. The Alps are utterly amazing. And that fear factor was just the stimulus I needed to get this body in the best shape I've been in over a decade. I had an amazing adventure, stunning scenery, great company, outstanding food. We are going to be in France and Italy, so of course the food's going to be outstanding. It was simply an overall A-plus experience. I can't wait to share it with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today we're going to be hiking the Mont Blanc circuit, a roughly 110-mile, 175-kilometer trek that takes you around Europe's highest mountain, Mont Blanc. It goes through France, Italy, and Switzerland. Tradition has it that you hike it counterclockwise. On our hike, we usually get to see Mont Blanc throughout the tour. It's an imposing glacier-covered mountain. It sits at 15,777 feet, or 4,806 meters. It feeds Italy's last glacial rivers. The most popular trail is the Mont Blanc circuit, which goes around this Mont Blanc massif. Though there are many people who climb and even ski on it, which is crazy, we're going to be hiking down at the lower elevations, not up at the high peaks. So we're probably most of the time between, say, 5,000 and 7,000 feet. So altitude's not an issue, although you are going to see people who are climbing this mountain, and it can be quite dangerous. I'll get into that a little bit more later. Some people even ski on it. This whole region is just built around the outdoors. This particular mountain section, Mont Blanc Massif, hugs the border of France, Italy, and Switzerland, so we're going to be hiking in all 3 countries. Back in the Middle Ages, people were worried that this mountain was possessed by a dragon, and as the glacier advanced, like dragon tongues through the mountain passes towards the valley towns below of Chamonix and Courmayeur, the villagers feared they were going to be swallowed up by the dragon. Eventually, a couple hundred years later, a reward was offered to the first person brave enough to climb to the summit of Mont Blanc, and it took 20 years for somebody to gin up the courage to do so. He survived, and the people have been climbing it ever since. But the people were still afraid of the ice advancing towards these villages. So they hired some monks to come out and do a benediction to stop the ice from advancing on their villages. And it worked, and that ended up being the end of the Little Ice Age. Fun stories I thought we'd start the show with. My tour was with my affiliate Active Adventures, and like most active tours, it's not exclusively hiking. Active always throws in some biking, paddling, or some other activities. They kind of spread it out, but it is usually predominantly hiking. So on our 12-day tour, we hiked maybe 2/3 the entire circuit. And from what I understand, we skipped some of the valley villages and one section where it's a little bit technical and you have to climb up some anchored in ladders on the side of the exposed granite. So they skipped that section for us. So we were never in any like scary or exposed places. We were high, it was hard, but there was nothing dangerous about it. I feel like we had a really well-balanced trip that included mostly hiking, like I said, but we also got in some kayaking and biking for a little bit. And on our free day, I went on the funnest whitewater rafting trip I've ever been on. I want to thank Active for an outstanding trip, especially our tour guides, Kiwi Emma from New Zealand, where Active is based, and our local hiking guide, Fabulous Fabby, and Karen, who transport our luggage each day to the next inn and prepared an array of food for us each morning so we could pack up a picnic lunch to take up into the mountains. And as I mentioned, Active is one of my affiliates, and they offer my listeners a discount with my exclusive promo code. However, they don't let me publish it, so nobody can just Google it on, Active Adventures promo codes and then get it if they're not a listener. However, one of these aggregators scraped the audio of my podcast, and so they published my old Ada 200 and some of the other promo codes I've used in the past. So I have voided out all of those, and I'm not going to put it on the show anymore. So if you want the discount code, you need to email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. Sorry about that. I can't control whoever it was that did that, but it's out there, and that's not fair to Active. It should be just for my listeners. So again, just email me if you want the promo code. And one thing that I want to mention too, I do use the affiliates. That's one way to keep this show ad-free, which I have heard that now most podcasts, 10% are ads. Drives me crazy, so that's why I never wanted to do that in the show. And this was a way that I figured I could come up with some kind of a way to help support the program. I am a retiree, don't forget. Anyhow, let's get on to the fun. You start off by flying into Geneva, Switzerland, which is easily accessible from anywhere in Europe. I usually like to just get to Europe as inexpensively as I can and then take one of the regional budget airlines to my destination. And if you need tips on saving money on travel, I'll put a link in the show notes about some episodes I did. In fact, I just did some reruns while I was in Mont Blanc, so you can just scroll back to last month's shows and see them there. But I'll put links in the show notes for you in case you missed those. If you're out doing your own adventures. The Geneva airport isn't that big. From there, you take about an hour and a half bus to Chamonix, France, which you can book ahead on Flixbus, which is a really good way to get around Europe. There's an easy-to-use app. Or you can do like I did. I was worried that what if my plane was late? I didn't want to have a reservation and then miss my bus ride. So I just decided to wait till I got to the airport. It's a little bit more expensive that way, but I just figured, what the heck, I'll do it. There's buses that run pretty much throughout the day. But you can save about half price if you do book in advance. So the bus dropped me off at the train station, which is about a 2-block walk to our lovely downtown Chamonix Inn. Our inn was on a pedestrian walkway, so a cab couldn't have gotten me there anyway. So you're going to have to walk at least a little bit. So keep that in mind with your luggage. I loved at our Isabel Inn that I could see the glacier right outside my window and from my deck. I thought that was very cool. I'd be sharing my room with Peg, who you know. She and I traveled so far to the Morocco and the Dolomites together. And so you've met her on those. And also on our tour was Noma, who you also met in the Dolomites adventure. The month before, in fact, we did a test hike together on Mount Mitchell in North Carolina to check out our fitness level on the East Coast tallest mountain, which sits at around 6,700 feet. So that's approximately probably our average altitude for our trip. And plus, that's a very difficult hike. And that would get a chance to check out our hiking legs and see how prepared we are when we still had about a month to really gear it up. This is definitely a adventure you want to train for because it is challenging. Like I said, it's rated a 4 out of 5. So I actively trained for 4 months and intensely trained for 2. Like I said, I love the shape that my body's in. So this was a super added bonus is that I got myself really fit, which I'm very proud of. Chamonix, which is our starter trail town, is a charming and bustling outdoorsy town noted for both hiking and skiing and just all outdoors. You'll also see people mountain biking around. It's just a very active, upscale mountain village. It sits in the valley surrounded by the glacial mountains, and it's beautiful. It's filled with restaurants and gift shops, and the people are dressed either really nicely or in their outdoor gear because they're just about to head out or get back from having some fun. On our first night, we met up our guides and the rest of our group at a welcome dinner, which was an amazing spread, which some of us consider the finest meal that we had there, although in contention, I would say is also our farewell meal. We really didn't have a bad meal. We are, after all, in one of the best regions for food. Everything was just super fresh, delicious, either picked that day or the day before or made the day before. It was just a really fine cuisine throughout. Emma, our fun-loving active adventures guide from New Zealand, and our local hiking guide was our fabulous Fabby, who, despite also being in her 60s, could hike rings around the group of us. Our other guests included a husband and wife, Brad and Robin, and their teenage son, Logan, a great 16-year-old kid. He was an asset to the group. At our first dinner, Robin steeled up courage to try escargot. And those of us who do like the buttered snails enjoyed the rest of the plate as well. We all turned in early so we could be fresh for the real start of our adventure in the morning. Like virtually all guided adventure tours I've been on, the first full day is fairly mild so you can get over any jet lag and time change. Plus, it lets the guides kind of assess the capabilities of their new group. So we had a fun day taking a train up to Montanvers. It's above Chamonix, and from there we can see the glacier. It's a super steep train, and it was once a coal-fired train that took 400 kilos of coal to make it to the top. Before the train was built, rich people were hand-carried up by some kind of palanquin. Now that is a backbreaking job. But from up top, you're going to get a terrific vantage point, plus great views of the town down below. You also see tons of paragliders, and that really sang to me. I remember that Linda did do the paragliding, and I wanted to do it on her off day, and I just hope that I'm going to have the courage to take that leap. We hiked up through the trees and boulders to Le Signal Forbes, a lookout point where we got terrific views of the Mer de Glace Glacier, the Sea of Glass for sure. We also got to see the jagged spires and the mountaintops that looked like knife edges, but Fabi said it was wide enough to actually walk on some of them. No doubt it was these powerful views that were the inspiration that kept drawing writers like Charles Dickens and Mary Kelly, who wrote Frankenstein here. While we were doing the established Mont Blanc Trail, crazy people are climbing all over these mountains, and each year, unfortunately, many people die rock climbing and ice climbing in and around these glaciers. And sadly, since glaciers are always moving either forward or backward, movement dislodges some rock and ice, and this morning it actually killed a climber and injured 4 more. It's not uncommon to see the rescue helicopters in the distance. But those people are up high in the danger zone. What we're doing is not dangerous. So like I said, in our trail, we're not at altitude. We're not on glaciers. At this time of year, you only do this trail in the summertime. Active offers the tour from mid-June through mid-September. So you might see a little bit of snow and might have to wear spikes, but it's not going to be anything crazy. I did this in August. I just got back a couple of weeks ago, and we saw a little bit of snow, but nothing that we had to really go over. We were just hiking over normal rock and dirt paths, although in the earlier late season, you might have a little bit of snow to walk over, as I believe Linda did, as I recall. There was no place on our trek that there was any treacherous exposure to worry about. Like I said, the people that do have to worry are the ones that are climbing up above us, not us. So after checking out the glacier and Chamonix vistas, and before boarding the train to return to Chamonix, we took this erector set-looking set of maybe like 100 stairs down to an opening inside the glacier. It seems for generations that a single family has been boring an entrance and maintaining tunnels inside this glacier, so we got to walk around inside the ice. It was amazing. It was definitely cool, figuratively and literally. You can be sure to check out my photos and videos on activetraveladventures.com so you can see what it looked like. Very cool. And I found out the stairs are erector set looking because the family has to change the entrance a couple times a year as the glacier changes, like I mentioned. And sometimes the opening, the sun will hit it and melt it. And so they just keep rechanging the opening and drilling it back into the interior tunnels. I found the whole thing fascinating and beautiful. A little bit later, it was another yummy dinner. And did I mention we are in France? And then after that, off to sleep. Tomorrow, instead of hiking, we're going to be paddling. Before I forget, thinking about sleep. All right, 2 things very typical of Europe. The bedding is normally a duvet, which is too hot for me in the summer. So normally I pack my silk sleeping bag liner that I use as a sheet in Europe, but unfortunately I forgot to pack it. And most hotels in Europe do not have air conditioning, so the rooms can get warm at night. We were there during a hot spell. They called it a heat wave with heat warnings because the temperature was going to get up to the mid-80s Fahrenheit, around close to 30 centigrade. I consider that relatively cool for the August, but over there they don't have AC, and so it can get a touch warm. So I recommend packing a lightweight liner if you go to Europe in the summertime. And if you can't take the heat at night, consider also packing a small battery-operated fan, like I was advised to take when I went to Haiti for that same reason. So I would just check the forecast before you fly over and just pack accordingly. Another thing I wish I'd brought, and I normally do, I don't know, I just was kind of rushed when I packed, is that portable clothesline that Noma had recommended. I bought that. I love that. It fits in the palm of your hand and weighs absolutely nothing. Very handy because you should be bringing quick dry stuff so you can wash them in the sink and not have to overpack. Another thing about Europe is they do not serve breakfast very early. In some places I've been over there, breakfast isn't served till 8 o'clock. And if I'm hiking, I'm usually long on the trail by then. And most of your inns are going to include breakfast, which is typically going to be an assortment of breads and croissants, yogurt with some goodies to doctor it up. Sometimes you'll get scrambled eggs, meat and cheese, assorted fruits, and of course coffee and tea. Active is usually able to arrange for our breakfast to start at 7, even when the inn's normal time was later. So one thing to consider, if you need more coffee than you can drink down in a quick breakfast, you may want to bring a tiny coffee maker so you can have something to drink before the dining room opens. I'll put recommendations for all these things in the show notes for you. On this morning, breakfast was at 7, and we had to meet Karen and promptly leave in the van at 7:30 so we could be at our kayaking site on time for our guided paddle. So we had a super quick turnaround this morning to eat, get ready, pack, get our bags down, etc. And I like to brush my teeth after eating, so I waited till after I ate to run up, brush, and then bring down my luggage for transport. In my haste, I did not do a final sweep to make sure I didn't miss anything. I also didn't bother to lock the door. I just dropped my key at the front desk, which all this turned out to be a big mistake, which I learned about the following day. So off we head to Lake Annecy, where our guide took us around this pretty and very active lake that we saw, I think, 3 castles. The winds were mild, so it was a pleasant paddle. The lake is surrounded by mountains, and like I said, we saw a few castles, so there was lots to look at. They gave us dry skirts to keep us from getting wet inside the kayak, but the water was probably cool. I don't think the skirts were necessary, but it was nice to have that. I mean, we saw people swimming by the shoreline. After a couple hours of paddling, we returned our kayaks back to the beach and then took a van to historic downtown Annecy, where we had time to grab lunch and explore this bustling, small, historic waterfront city. Since we didn't have a lot of time, we split up so everybody could do whatever he or she wanted. I wanted to check out the waterfront park and gardens, hoping to grab some street food, and with whatever remaining time, I'd go get a gelato from the place that Emma recommended as her favorite and explore the famous flower box-filled canals that pierce the city. I found the park easily enough, but only ice cream vendors at first. Then I'd see, somebody's got fresh fruit, and that sounded perfect because I had some leftover carby, crunchy, snacky, salty things in my day pack that I'd brought for me on the plane. And so that made for a nice, easy, fun lunch where I could people watch along the shore, which is always one of my favorite things to do when I travel. Afterwards, I headed for that gelato and had a yummy pistachio treat. Then off I went to check the canals. Before long, I had to use the restroom. And normally you could just go to a restaurant, buy a drink, and get to use the restroom. But I saw a public bathroom, the kind like I saw in France that washes itself between uses. I remembered being fascinated and puzzled as to how does that sucker work? They are these huge stainless steel boxes. Outside the door, there's 3 lights like a street light, red, yellow, and green to indicate occupied, cleaning, or available. When I used that one in France, it didn't look like there's even an opening in the toilet bowl, but obviously the waste has to go somewhere. Also, I didn't see any sprinklers, and I couldn't figure out how was it cleaning itself between uses. I never forgot it, and so I recognized that steel box as a bathroom and went towards it. Both of the stalls were occupied, so I waited outside. Then a guy emerged from the left one. I grabbed the door and went in as one does when one's waiting. Or I should say, as one does when it is a non-self-cleaning toilet. I get inside. I still don't realize my error until the door bolts shut and I realize A, I am trapped, and B, I'm about to discover how these newfangled toilets get clean between uses. I'm smiling as I'm telling you this story. It was so ridiculous. I am pounding on the door to no avail. And then the lights go out. But just before I could see some pipes emerging from the floor, and then I see the start and hear the gushing water. For the record, there is a pierced pipe that comes up from the floor from both the front and the back walls, and there's holes in them, so a string of jets are forced across to wash the floor towards each other. I'm now horrifiedly thinking, are the pipes going to come out of the ceiling and wash me down? I didn't know what was going to happen. It was pitch black. And as horrified as I was, I have to admit it was funny. And I did think, I'm still finding the humor at the moment. I just want you to know that. And it was dark, so I couldn't see what came and washed down the toilet, but I'm sure there was something. And the lights finally came back on. The door side of pierced pipe had washed all the remaining water down the drain in the back. And then finally the door unlocked. But now I still got to go to the bathroom. So I open and then shut the door again so that the toilet knows that I'm in there this time. I'm there and I'm supposed to be in there. But now I realize there's no hanger in this big box, so I have to hold on my backpack while I tinkle, and I'm laughing out loud. So at least the mystery of the self-cleaning toilet has now been solved. I had planned to surprise my tour mates by letting them find out about this ridiculous mishap, just like you just did through this podcast. But I couldn't completely hold my secret, and I told Emma, who kept telling me later she continues to laugh about it, and so do I. The whole thing was ridiculous. Gratefully, the rest of the day was uneventful, culminating in yet another amazing dinner. The yummy salad with slices of prosciutto being the most memorable. I want to get a good night's sleep as tomorrow is the hardest day of the entire tour. We're going to be hiking 10 miles or about 16K with over 4,000 feet of elevation gain and a descent of 2,200 feet, or up 1,200 meters and down almost 700 meters. Big day. The big reason I wanted to train, we have 2 really hard days like this. Peg and I tend to be pretty organized, Peg especially so. She normally gets up first, and when she's done, I get up and get dressed, and then we head down for breakfast. Our bags are mostly packed the night before, so all we have to do is stuff in our toiletries and nightwear after breakfast. So I'd already packed up yesterday's water shoes that I needed for kayaking, and then I'm looking around for my hiking boots, my new less than 30-mile hiking boots. You know how I'm always telling you to train in your hiking boots for at least a couple of weeks prior to your trip so you can avoid any kind of fit issues or blisters? But my feet have been changing as I've developed a bunion on my right foot, so I couldn't wear my old boots anymore. And I went through 3 different tries of pairs that I had bought in the last month, and I finally ended up buying a much larger size Merrell boot that I only got in maybe 10 miles before the trip. I'd worn Merrells before, and so with fingers crossed, I hoped that this new pair was going to work out. European hotel rooms are small, and I couldn't find my boots anywhere. I tossed open my pack, but I knew I would have remembered trying to shove the boots in there because I don't think they would have fit. I probably would have had a time to the outside for Karen to transport yesterday morning. My boots were nowhere to be found. A sinking feeling of dread filled my soul. I must have left them at yesterday's hotel, and I didn't notice because I was wearing water sandals and I was in such a rush to get down to get to that 7:30 bus departure. Now I'm going to miss the biggest hiking day that I've been training for. I was so looking forward to, and I didn't have any idea when are we going to be in a town where I can buy a replacement pair. I was worried I had ruined my entire trip. Lucky for me, and sad for Peg, she had decided to skip this day because she was worried she was going to be too slow climbing up the mountains and didn't want to hold us up on an already long day. So Peg's opting out meant that I could possibly wear her boots. She's much taller than me, and her feet are a couple sizes too big for me. But with my bunion and then tying the laces up tight so my feet wouldn't slide down or around too much, I decided to go for it. And fortunately, while the trail has lots of rocks, and I recommend shoes with ankle support for that reason, there are rarely any roots. And surely I would have been catching my toe with the extended toe box I wasn't used to. But it turned out Peg's boots actually worked out fine for me. I wore several pair of thick socks to fill in the shoes as well. Along the trail, I saw people in gaiters, but I don't think they're necessary for this trail. But like I said, I would recommend ankle boots. I suppose you could do trail runners, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think you would want some ankle support. There's some places it was just rubble. Karen was going to call the old hotel when they opened and have them go look for my shoes, and then she could pick them up because fortunately she had to go back that way today anyway. But sadly, they never appeared. So after our hike, I tried on a pair of trail runners that Noma had packed, and I wore them the next day. And then the following day, we were at a trail town. I could buy some new boots there. But today, on the big hiking day, in Peg's boots, off I went to hike on this challenging day. The trails are pretty well marked. And I say trails because there's lots of intersecting trails in the area. One thing I thought was interesting, they tell you the time it will take you to get to the destination or whatever the intersection point is rather than the distance. I thought that was interesting. So I might say 4.5 hours instead of 10 miles. And it seemed like a lot of times they were way off. So if you do this on your own, you want to make sure you have a good map and probably even a good app. And I can't tell you if it's because the trail was more gradual going up or the fact that I overtrained played a part, but I was really proud of my body chugging up that mountain. I never really felt out of breath or needed to take a break to let my heart rate calm down, which thrilled me. And I also was thrilled when Fabi commented that I was able to carry on a conversation while going uphill. That made me feel really good. It's always better to overtrain so that you aren't exhausted at the end of the day, and it feels more like play than work. I've never regretted training hard, but I've definitely regretted not having done so. Plus, inadequate training tends to lead to injuries like that bum knee I got in Scotland in episode 3. I think Fabi's original plan was to hike up a little bit beyond an upcoming mountain hut to one of the special lunch spots she always found. But the weather turned, and we soon not only rushed to put on rain jackets and backpack covers, but also had to laugh at the short burst of hail, a bit smaller than a pea. While it was raining, we still managed to make it to the hut just in time to miss a downpour. Us and many dozens of other hikers who had the same idea to run for shelter. The mountain huts offer dormitory bunk rooms that you need to reserve way early if that's what you want to do because they sell out all the time. And they also have a kitchen where you can buy hot meals, snacks, or hot or cold drinks. There are lots of indoor picnic tables, and despite the crowds, Fabi and Emma managed to snag a seat for each one of us to eat our packed lunches. Most of the huts require cash, as they probably don't have internet to do credit card transactions. The only cash I needed on this entire trip was for the huts and guide tips. Your credit card or debit card works everywhere else, including the buses. And note that when I got to Geneva, since I was staying there, they give you a free public transport pass, which I found super helpful. If you need a little cash when you're traveling overseas, you usually get the best exchange rate using a bank, not some of these, make sure it's a bank ATM. And if you need cash just to get to town from the airport, even in the airport, look for a bank ATM instead of just any old ATM or money exchange. I learned a super important cash tip from Peg. A little too late for me to use it, but I will remember it in the future. Every once in a while, a bank ATM will tell you an exchange rate and ask you to accept it. They're always awful rates, and I always thought that I had to accept it if I wanted the cash. And in Chamonix, I needed to get some cash to tip the guides. Everywhere I went to, the rate was awful. But Peg said that you can say no and still get the cash. That just means that you're going to accept whatever rate that your credit card or debit card bank rate, which is always going to be better than the awful rate that they offer you at the foreign bank. Had I known that, probably would have saved me about $20. So for this trip, you're going to need euros for France and Italy and the Swiss franc in Switzerland if you are using cash, since they aren't part of the EU. But I found out later in Geneva that they accepted my euros at a museum that I was trying to get rid of some of my euros, but they would give me change only in francs. The Swiss businesses can decide whether they also want to accept euros or not. So you can't count on that, but chances are, because they're fairly close, that you might be able to get away with that. Back at the hut, shortly after we finished eating, the clouds parted and we departed. We still had a long way to go. I loved how the gray clouds offered a brooding look to the mountains, which then also got cheery by the sound and the view of sheep eating grass in the pastures. We were above tree line, so I had a panoramic view for much of the day, and the Alps are prettier than any photo I've ever seen. Yet my photos are still beautiful, and you can see them at activetraveladventures.com, which I strongly encourage you to do so. In some places, the mountains here are rubble, yet in others, they're grass-covered balds with nothing higher than your knee, sometimes just grasses and wildflowers. We started to recognize some of the flora and its habitat. There's some white cottony-looking plant that likes the wet boggy area, so we knew we weren't going to be sitting there for a picnic. I'd have to say that my biggest surprise of the entire trip was all the wildflowers we saw. The mountainsides were covered in blooms of every color and variety throughout the whole hike. I think it's like Glacier National Park, which I covered in episode 2, where because the summer starts late and fall starts early, pretty much everything has to bloom at once so it can get it done and produce seeds for the next year. So it was just a bonanza of blooms. And while I recognized many of the blooms, like Scabiosa and the spirally seed heads of anemone, there were some especially pretty ones that reminded me of turtle heads. I can't remember the name of, but I would recognize them if I saw them again. They also have this dandelion-looking flower that has a black center that when it's ready to be pollinated, attracts flies to do so. they have some carnivorous plants as well, which is always fun. It was a great day, and I was thrilled that I didn't miss it. Thank you so much, Peg, for sharing your shoes. We had a special treat the next day. Fabby knows the folks who make the best tasting French cheese, a variety called Beaufort cheese. So we got a sneak peek at the operation. They are able to make 2 large 100-pound blocks of cheese per day. The cheesemaker came in the processing room with a cigarette and the ash dangling out of his mouth. Hopefully ash isn't their secret ingredient, but we all got a laugh from it. In this relatively small room, the milk is mixed in this ginormous vat with a paddle, and then it gets sucked up this huge shop vac looking thing, which can then dump it into the round blocks. It then goes in this cool room where it aged and gets dated and coated in wax, and they salt it every day during its curing period, which takes 6 to 12 months. It's all very interesting, and I'm delighted we had the opportunity to see the operation. The day was beautiful, both weather and scenery-wise. Again, lots of flowers, and I took lots of photos, many of which you can see on the website and on my YouTube channel. But no one took more photos than my travel mates, Brad and Logan. They were stopping all the time, usually at the same time, maybe every 20 minutes to take one, so much so that we teasingly started calling them the P team. Fortunately, they're fast hikers, so we never had to wait for them, and we all found it funny. Make no mistake, this hike is hard, but it's definitely doable if you train. Fabby would describe each day's hike and terrain at a briefing the night before. Using her hand as the terrain, she would describe switchbacks as she said up, 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 like a metronome. On occasion, we would hear undulating, which you always love that part. I mean, that section was not going to be hard. On the hard days, she and Emma would describe the day's hike like a big meal. They'd tell us how many courses. One day we had a big 6-course meal. So after each chunk of the hike, she'd say, oh, we just finished the first course. Now you finished the second course. We're at the 4th course. Now we're finally in the 6th course. So we could tell our bodies and our minds how much further we had to go. Another new expression for me was balcony. So whenever we hugged the mountainside lengthwise, horizontally, but weren't on the ridge, Fabby said we were on a balcony, which I think is an appropriate word. I just never heard it used that way in hiking before. One thing I found amazing is it wasn't just us hikers on this trail. Every once in a while, you'd see mountain bikers. I personally think they're crazy. There are places where you have to carry your bike. Going downhill has got to be wild, especially since there's lots of hikers out there, and they're not expected to be passed by a biker. The trail is smoother on the Swiss side, so we saw more bikers there. On occasion, you would run into other Americans, but mostly we met other French and Italians whenever we were clustered, say when we were at a country border or at a mountain hut. One important thing I want you to know about, too, is in late August each year, they run a race, so you want to make sure you do not schedule a trip for whatever week that is, or I imagine everything's going to be way too crowded and uncomfortable with crazy runners running by you. And since we were there in early August, we did see a lot of trail runners trying to get some practice and learning the terrain before the big race. Other than not doing this trail in late August, you can do it anytime from mid-June through mid-September. And while we saw lots of wildflowers, most of the animal life that we saw were sheep and cows. Sometimes we'd see some birds, including an osprey, which surprised me, and lots of marmots, although we heard more of them than we saw. They chirp a little bit like a bird, which gives you an idea where to look to see the guard outside the burrow. They blend in beautifully, so Brad had the sharpest eyes for finding the marmots. We end our day in the delightful village of Courmayeur, my favorite stop on the tour, and we get to stay a couple of nights since we have a free day tomorrow. I love the mountain architecture and colorful window boxes with the curved alley streets. They have a big promenade where I'm able to buy a pair of Italian hiking boots that I hope are going to work out for the rest of my trip. There are lots of things you can do on your off day, and I chose to join the family and go whitewater rafting. It was only a couple of hours, which I thought might be too short a period of time to raft, but looking back, I'm not sure we'd have had the endurance to raft longer. I should have been a little bit suspicious when our guide Ivan gave us a real workout practicing our commands. Paddle forward, power back, get down, assume position, get down, hold on, paddle forward, power down, get down, paddle forward, get down, get down. Frankly, I was glad my knees were cooperating with the fast-paced commands. We're still on dry land, and I'm exhausted. The river itself was class 3 and 4, which I love. It's exciting, but I don't worry about dying. Now, I've whitewater rafted maybe a dozen times on some of the world's most iconic rivers, but never have I rafted on a river where it is nonstop rapids. Mind you, class 3 and 4 rapids continually, it had to be for 5 of the 7-mile run. I regret that I didn't bring my GoPro and attach it to my helmet, but frankly, all you would mostly see is me getting down and back up in position like 4 to 6 times a minute. It was unbelievable, it was exhilarating, exciting, and a total blast. I have never had so much fun in a raft before, and I've done the Macquarie, the Tully, and the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. We were 3 rafts heading out together. The launch was a bit daunting, as you start by plunging right into the rapids at a very steep angle from the shore. I mean, we dropped down like 10 feet, and then off we go. Within the first minute, I hear Ivan tell me to grab my paddle. I should explain that this raft was unlike any I'd been on before. It looked like a regular raft, but it had a metal cage-like support in the middle, and Ivan, instead of being in the rear like most of my raft guides, he was inside this cage and had 2 long oars. And this contraption provided the much-needed stability for this crazy river. Robin and I were up front, so our job, if we heard Ivan say, "Hold my paddle," was to grab the oar on our side while still holding onto our own. "Hold my paddle." No sooner had Rob and I complied when Ivan plunges in the rapids. He had first gotten us over to the shore where we held onto the vegetation to remain in place. Turns out a guy had fallen out in one of the rafts behind us, and Ivan went to rescue him, which he did, although I don't see how with all this powerful raging water. The guy was obviously shaken up, and so he ended up walking back to our original put-in because he didn't feel like going on any further. Then a few minutes later, off we go and had the ride of our lives. Once the rapids finally calmed down, the rafting company had kindly brought the guy who fell out into the river so he could participate in those last relatively calm couple of miles. I would so do this again. So when you go, if you like to raft, do that on your off day. It was so much fun. Wherever we crossed a country border, there would be a large stone cairn, sometimes decorated with prayer flags, as well as signage. On crossing days, Emma would bring the appropriate flags so we could hold them and straddle the border for a great photo. That was fun. A lot of people tended to take a break at the border, so that's when you could hear different languages and accents. On our next day of hiking, we actually saw a bit of snow along the trail. I walked in it just because it was there, but the patch was small enough to walk around if you so chose. There's a fair amount of stream crossings on the circuit, but nothing really major. And with all the pasture land, I personally wouldn't drink from it without treating it to avoid giardia, which is a parasite found in animal waste that I've had the unpleasant misfortune to become acquainted with. Each day, Fabi would instruct us on how much water to bring and when and if we could get a proper refill, usually at a hut. Water is heavy at 8 pounds a gallon, so you only want to bring what you need and maybe a tad bit more if it's really hot. I prefer to use a bladder as it makes it easier to drink while you're hiking, so you tend to get in the fluids that you need. I had brought electrolytes just in case, but I didn't use them as I'm not a big sweater, but I think everybody else pretty much did. Fabi always chose the prettiest places for our lunch and rest stops, and we got plenty of rest stops along the way and never felt pushed or rushed. We always had a spectacular view at our stops, often of Mont Blanc from the different angles, although there were a couple of days when the peak itself was out of view. Once, though, instead of peaks and wildflower meadows, we ate around old World War II bunkers, which were kind of cool. How the men fought in these rugged mountains blows my mind. I remember thinking that in the Dolomites, too, when we were on the Via Ferratas and I could see the other Via Ferratas. Crazy, crazy. On afternoon rest stops, Fabi or Emma would usually pull out some fun local treat, which gave us a chance to taste French junk food. I thought that was fun. On a hot afternoon, we got to a cooling river just in time to snag the best sitting rock so we could cool our feet in the frigid water. A small group came up behind us and looked wistfully because we had taken all the good rocks. I could only keep my feet in for about 5 seconds at a time, but I kept dabbing them in and out, in and out, in and out because it was refreshing as well as invigorating, and my feet loved it. Each evening, we would go to a restaurant where we usually got a choice of appetizer, main, and dessert. I ate decadent desserts for lunch and dinner for 12 days, and I usually had a croissant with breakfast. It's a good thing I was working it off every day. This is definitely an advantage of adventure travel. The mountain peaks look different when we enter Switzerland. They have some jagged spires that catch the sunlight beautifully. Late in the afternoon, we stop at our last hut of our journey. Emma says Active is treating us for a drink. She recommends a lemony spritzer, so instead of my usual beer, I go with it. It's a beautiful day and with wonderful people enjoying incredible views. It really doesn't get any better than this. We end the day in a small lake town. It's only a mile walk around the lake, but I do believe everyone in town is either out swimming, paddleboarding, fishing, or doing something by the water until the late afternoon. I buy a beer and find a shady bench where I can people watch, as well as silently cheer on a fisherman who doesn't seem to be having much luck or paying me any mind. He puts his baited rod down on the ground and walks 50 feet to chat with a friend. Yep, that's when he finally gets a bite. He races over and reels in his fish. I don't speak French, but I know the word for trout in Spanish is trucha. I point at the fish. Trucha, trucha. He pulls out his phone and gets a translator to confirm indeed it is a trout. We celebrate and now are best buds. As simple as this interaction was, these are some of my favorite memories of a trip, connecting in some real way with the local. It somehow brings our differing worlds together. Here I am telling you about my encounter with the fisherman. When he got home, he very well may have told his wife about the crazy American who clapped when he caught a Spanish trout. In our little way, we both became part of each other's day and story. I just love that. We waved heartily goodbye when I headed back to the inn to get ready for dinner. Eventually, we make it back to Chamonix. Decision time. I have wondered, admired, envied all the paragliders I've seen crisscrossing over the mountains all week. I want to do it. I'm scared to do it. I have to decide. If I'm going to do it, they need to reserve now for tomorrow, and I'll have to miss out on one of our activities, one that Peg and Noma did before the trip and loved. I don't want to miss it, but I really want to try it. My hang-up is I also want to watch people take off to see if I think I can just jump off a mountainside. This is impossible. And it's going to cost €200 or around $225 for 20 minutes. In the end, I decided I'm going to stay with the group. I don't want to spend that kind of money and then chicken out. Walk, 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 chicken, chicken, kit. I know I would have loved it, but I also loved what I would have missed. Taking the gondola up to, I'm going to really screw up this name, the Aiguille du Midi at 12,600 feet or about 3,850 meters. You have to watch my fast frame video of this gondola ride. It's super high and the views from the top are unparalleled. It was one of the highlights of my trip. They have many different platforms so you can see the glacier down below and are quite close to the top of Mont Blanc. We are close enough to see the climbers on the various trails that they had made that day. On glaciers, crevasses open up all the time, so climbers will reroute once it gets dangerous. One looked dangerous to me, but we saw the little ants down below stepping across these big cracks. Not me. No way, Jose. That looked scary. Also, many who climb Mont Blanc use this cable car to get up the mountain so they don't have to hike all the way up from Chamonix. In fact, we saw a small group of climbers with all their impressive ropes, their carbuncles, ice picks, and ice axes climbing up a ladder up the side of the platform as they finished their climb. That was so cool. In fact, I caught this one group as they were coming up on video and shared it with them, which they were thrilled. Most definitely, some of my favorite views and the photos come from this day. So I felt glad that I chose this instead of paragliding. Although I do hope one day to do so, even if it's not in Chamonix. Our hiking may be done, but there's still one more event on our tour, mountain biking. Only the guys and I decide to go. I don't think I mentioned before that Brad had previously taught mountain biking, so I'm sure not only is he good, Logan, I'm sure, is quite comfortable up on that trail. Me, I've only done it 3 times before. Oh, yeah, that's some experience. Ha. So we suit up and then ride through Chamonix, and we got to see some cool areas that I wouldn't have known about without going on the bike ride, so I like that. And going up the hill wasn't so bad. I was like, I can do this, not too bad. I mean, we had nothing scary. And then it was time to go down. To me, that's the scary part of mountain biking. And somebody had once told me, don't brake on the downhill. You'll slide out your body over the front of the bike. So that always scared me. So if ever I go downhill, I just kind of pulse it a little bit. I don't brake hard. And fortunately, I'd taken a mountain biking class in Moab, and the instructor told me, trust the bike. And so for I'm going to guess, somewhere around half a mile of straight downhill screes, which is lots of little loose pebbles that want to psych you out so you will fall into them. we got all this screed coming up straight downhill, and the boys and the guide, they're flying ahead of me, and I was like, okay. The guide had told us beforehand, stand on the pedals so we're upright and the pedals were horizontal. So with trust and a prayer and a mantra of trust the bike, trust the bike, trust the bike, I flew down the scree hill. Maybe not as fast as the boys, but I think for a novice, I held my own, and more importantly, I didn't fall. We then go down by a river, which was like a little hidden paradise for locals, and you could see all the families out playing, and it was just a lovely little alcove. Again, never would have known about it had we not gone on this ride. And then eventually we end up near a pasture where a paraglider was just starting to land, so I got to see him come in, and it looked like so much fun. So one day I promised myself I'm going to do that. Hopefully someplace as pretty as Chamonix. Our farewell dinner was a feast matched only by our welcome dinner. All of our meals were great, but those two were definitely above and beyond. The desserts were a work of art, truly. And they not only looked amazing, they tasted fabulous as well. This was an amazing adventure. Thank you to Active Adventures for always overperforming and providing such amazing experiences. This is my 6th tour with them. In addition to the Mont Blanc, I've also done their North and South Island New Zealand trips, Peru with Machu Picchu, Patagonia, and the Dolomites. All were epic, and I highly recommend. I'll put links to all these in the show notes. Now I just need to figure out where to go next. Oh yeah, that's right. Next fall, I have booked Everspace Camp. And as I looked the other day, they still have space available if you want to join me. Email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I'll give you the dates and the promo code. And thanks also to Noma and Peg, Robin, Brad, and Logan, Fabi, Emma, and Karen for making such a wonderful memory together. If you'd enjoyed this show, please text it right now while you're thinking about it to a friend who might enjoy it. Word of mouth is the #1 way people discover new shows. I'd be most grateful. And I'm grateful for you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!